Hey guys, let me tell you how I lost over 125 pounds in just 6 months and how I've kept that off over the last 20 years. This is what I look like today, but that wasn't always the case. This is what I used to look like before at almost 300 pounds. Now, I know 6 months is fast. That's crazy fast. Do I recommend someone losing that amount of weight in only 6 months? I don't know. Let's get into how I did it and stick around till the end of the video where I'm gonna tell you what I would do differently if I had to do it all over again. So let's start off with nutrition, food, diet, the basics that everyone wants to know probably. So what was my diet and what was my nutrition like before when I was, almost 300 pounds, or what got me to be almost 300 pounds? Well, I'm gonna break it down for breakfast, lunch, dinner, snacks, just so you guys have an idea of what my diet really looked like. And this is just me remembering things that I used to eat as I was growing up. For breakfast, I can remember having very sugary cereals. I remember that was a staple in my diet. It was Frosted Flakes, it was Honey Bunches of Oats. I love those things. It was Fruit Loops, any kind of sugary cereal with milk. Now, for some reason, these things never filled me up. Looking back on it now, I know, hey, there's not a lot of protein. It's, full of sugar. So I understand why I wasn't getting full back then. But back then I didn't know. And I figured I'm eating food, I should feel full, but I never felt full. I just wanted to keep eating. So sometimes I would have a couple of bowls of cereal, whether it was Frosted Flakes, Fruit Loops, any of the other ones. And so I ended up, I just remember the flavor of the milk with all of the sugar at the bottom, like whether it was the Fruit Loops or whatever. You know how everyone loves that fruity cereal milk flavor at the end, if you're a milk person. And so I love that. I remember that feeling. I feel like I just remember not having enough. I could never get enough of this food. What did I have for lunch? For lunch, I had things like, processed frozen foods. So, I'd get home from school, for example, and I would have, frozen chicken nuggets or these bacon cheeseburgers that came in like these boxes that you would put into basically the microwave. You would take it out of a box, take it out of a bag, you'd put it into a microwave and you'd heat it up. And that was kind of like fast food in your freezer. And I remember that having one of those just was not enough. So sometimes I would have two of those. I think those were like, close to 400 or 500 calories. And so sometimes I would have one or two of those for lunch and I would still feel hungry. I would also end up having some sugary soda. So I remember I loved putting the Orange Crush into the freezer, not till it was frozen, obviously, but just enough for it to get a little bit slushy and then, icy. And then I would put that and I would have a whole big glass of that. So probably 8 to 16 ounces of that. You could start to see how I gained all of this weight over the years. Sometimes if I remember during high school, we were able to go out and drive out to lunch. And so I would go and get fast food too. It was always drive through Wendy's really quick before you had to get back to school, or a drive through McDonald's, so I would get a quarter pounder with cheese. A lot of times I upgraded to a quarter pounder or a double quarter pounder with cheese a lot of times. And, obviously the large fry, or back then the supersized fries was a new thing. I would always get chicken nuggets because who's not gonna get chicken nuggets? For some reason, I just loved chicken nuggets back then. And then sometimes I would even get like a dessert, like a McFlurry or something. And so I would, can you imagine like all of that, probably 15 to 2,000 calories just for lunch right there. And then for dinner, I come from grew up in a Hispanic household. So we had a lot of rice and beans and then typically like some kind of protein. So chicken, maybe steak, something like that. Come to think of it, dinner was probably the healthiest meal that I had all day. We had our protein, which was usually like steak or chicken, and then we had rice and beans. So a little carb heavy, but we still had at least the protein. Now, sometimes that protein was breaded. So sometimes it was like a thin breaded steak, or sometimes we had like a breaded chicken breast, So sometimes that was a lot more calories as well because it was breaded, it was fried. Sometimes my mom, poor thing, she didn't know any better, right? So she would fry French fries. At least they were natural, so they didn't come out of a bag in a freezer, but they were still fried in canola oil. So that was essentially what I grew up with, was just high sugary, ultra processed foods. And so you can see why the calories just mounted and mounted and mounted and added up. And so one of the main things that I think about now looking back is, wow, I was eating a lot of ultra processed foods. I didn't know this at the time, but those foods just make you hungrier and hungrier. There are studies now that show that people who eat ultra processed foods mostly are consuming an additional 500 calories a day on average extra than the person that's just eating regular whole foods. And so what would happen is I would end up staying up late. And so what happens when you stay up later is I would get hungrier. And so what happened is I would end up having almost a second dinner or like a second lunch or something. So I would end up ordering pizza. I would end up having some pasta. I would end up having some kind of ultra processed food because I just couldn't get full, and I don't know, I just kept wanting to eat and eat and eat. And so obviously having that big meal at night then ruined my sleep for the night because I had this huge meal, then I go to sleep, then I got to get up early in the morning again and do it all over again. So you can start to piece together how I got to almost 300 pounds. Now, what did I do differently? How did I lose over 125 pounds in such a short amount of time, in 6 months? I remember I started officially on my, quote unquote plan. I was just kind of going along as and just kind of figuring things out as I went along. But I started that March of 2002. And by September of that year, I was already weighing about 170 pounds. So how did I do it? Well, the first thing I did was I shifted every food that I can think of to minimally processed whole foods. So I started to educate myself. I started to learn and read books on what's healthy and what's not healthy. And the main things that I read were try to eat stuff that's not as processed. Try to eat things like chicken breast. Back then, talking over 20 years ago, there was a lot of like eat broccoli and chicken and all the boring stuff. But I will say back then people were saying you can eat a little brown rice, you can eat a little of this, a little of that. And so I never tracked food back then. I never tracked food throughout the entire time that I lost all of the weight. And we'll talk about some of the things that I would do differently, as I mentioned at the end of the video. But one of the things that I noticed was that my portion sizes got smaller, but the main thing is the portion sizes got smaller because I got full quicker. And I got full quicker because I was eating more whole foods as opposed to that ultra processed variety of foods. And so what would breakfast look like? It would look like, at the time, egg whites with a lot of turkey. So I would do slices of turkey breast and I would, do egg whites. I would put maybe some spinach in there, maybe some onions, things like that. And I would make a big omelet. And that was that with maybe a little bit of toast. Now, I'll be honest, back then, I cut out carbs, not very, very strictly, but I cut out a good amount of carbs in the beginning of me losing weight because I didn't know any better. And back then, 20 years ago, I was one of those people that thought, oh, you got to cut out carbs to lose weight. That's who I was. That's who I thought. Like, I know better now, and we'll talk about at the end of the video why that's not true anymore. But, I would eat eggs. I would have maybe some toast. I would do protein shakes. So I was working out, and I eventually, we'll get into the fitness side of this in a second here, but I would do protein shakes, and I would remember I would pour egg whites into the protein shake with the powder and mix it all up and blend it all up, thinking that I just wanted to get as much protein as possible. And anyone who's been working out for the last 20 years or so, you know what I'm talking about. People used to mix these egg whites and all these other things together to try to get as much protein as possible. It's kind of nasty now that you think about it these days, because protein actually tastes good these days. But, so I would do a protein shake sometimes, but just eggs, turkey, bacon, or sliced turkey in the omelet. For lunch, I would typically I remember one of my staples was a Caesar salad, and I would tell them to hold the cheese or do little Parmesan cheese, and light on the croutons. Sometimes I would eliminate the croutons completely. And then instead of doing Caesar dressing, I would do just a little bit of olive oil. Again, I wasn't tracking, but I would only get whatever it is that I needed for olive oil. And I'm lucky that I just never liked Caesar dressing. Caesar dressing can be pretty unhealthy if you look at the calories that it has. But I just never liked it, so I'm lucky, and I would just use olive oil. So olive oil still has calories. I wasn't tracking at the time, but I knew to just have only what I needed and not too much. If I didn't have a salad, I'd probably have like a simple sandwich, but I'll be honest, I didn't have a lot of sandwiches back then. Today, I have a sandwich every day almost for lunch, and it's fine. But back then, I thought carbs were maybe bad. You were reading a lot of information in the news. There wasn't really social media, because I lost my weight back in 2002. So we didn't have Facebook. I don't even know if we had MySpace at the time. I forget. But it was basically the books that you read. And the books that you read told you stay away from processed foods and stay away from like white carbs. Go only for the complex carbs and things like that. So that's essentially the information that I was consuming. And that's the only thing I knew to go by to guide me. I stayed away from a lot of fruit because I thought it was sugar and maybe it was bad, so I didn't want to eat a lot of fruit. Now I know better, but for some reason at that point, I didn't know any better, and I thought, why would I have a banana? Why would I have an apple? That's all sugar, that's all fruit. And so I would try to stay away from that stuff as well. Again, we'll get into what I would do differently at the end of the video. In terms of dinner is where I started to incorporate a lot of vegetables and protein. So the key was making sure that I got enough protein through all of my meals. So if you think about breakfast with an omelet and with turkey slices or turkey bacon, that's a good amount of protein, or with a protein shake. And then you look at lunch. Lunch is chicken breast with a Caesar salad, right? So I'm getting the protein from the chicken breast or the piece of salmon or whatever it is that I'm having as a protein. And then for dinner, I would have typically grilled chicken, lean steak, but usually even back then I was kind of eliminating some steak because I knew it was a little higher in calories still. So I do a lot of chicken. I did a lot of plain tuna, maybe drizzled with a little bit of olive oil, or I would drizzle a little bit of olive oil on my chicken. And that's really what I did. I did a lot of fish as well. So I did like things like tilapia and things like salmon and stuff like that, because I knew that I needed to get protein and I was trying to incorporate some variety, but trying to stay away from like the fatty stuff. Another thing that I thought about back then, because it's what people told us, was that fat was bad. So I thought that carbs were bad, and then I thought that fat was bad. And so I just basically ended up having a ton of protein. Now, looking back on it, I can see why I lost weight doing that, because if you do that today, you're gonna lose weight too. Is that the healthiest way to do it? No. But you will lose weight if you eliminate everything but protein. But who wants to live a life of living only or eating only protein? That's not a life that's sustainable, and that's not something that's enjoyable. In terms of dinner, along with that protein, I would a lot of times have a plain baked potato or a baked sweet potato. Sometimes I would have maybe a little bit of a salad or something. And then I would start to incorporate after a while a little bit of brown rice. Now I know white rice, brown rice doesn't really make a difference. But back then I thought brown rice was better because they tell you stay away from the light colored carbs, stay away from the white carbs, and then only do the complex carbs. It doesn't make a difference. But hey, I was getting by and I was trying to learn as I went, and what I was doing was working, so I kept kind of going with it. In terms of snacks, because I was eating a lot more whole foods and because I was having a heavy emphasis on protein, I wasn't super hungry all the time like I was when I was eating all these processed foods. So my snacks really looked like maybe some cheese slices, maybe an apple sometimes. I would try to stay away from a lot of fruit, but maybe an apple sometimes, and maybe like some dark chocolate or something like that. I still eat dark chocolate to this day and I love it. Now I will eat, a banana or an apple or a piece of cheese as well. So my snacks really haven't changed much, but I tried not to snack a lot. When I was gaining weight, in terms of snacks, I would have a lot of almonds and nuts and cashews and things like that. I'm not talking about a handful. I'm talking about I would sit there with the bucket and I would just eat mindlessly. And if you know how many calories are in nuts and almonds and cashews, then you know that you can easily consume 500, 1,000 calories just in one sitting of eating nuts. So you can imagine all of those calories stacking up just from watching TV and mindlessly eating and snacking on nuts. Now, obviously, the after diet and the way that I lost the weight is much more whole foods, minimally processed foods. You'll notice that there's a lot more protein. In the beginning, I was having a lot of sugary cereals and a lot of processed foods, not a lot of protein, a lot of sugar, a lot of processed stuff, chemicals that my body didn't need. And I was just always hungry. All of a sudden, I make a shift to whole foods, unprocessed foods, and I'm not as hungry. I'm able to control myself better because I like to eat. And so one of the biggest keys for me up till this day and even today is I like to eat and I get hungry. So I need to make sure that I eat foods that are going to keep me full, because if I'm not full, I'm going to eat. And I know that a lot of people can relate to that. You get hungry and you want to eat. So that's nutrition in a nutshell. I mean, I started off with really processed foods. I got away from the processed foods. I started to incorporate a lot of protein and I started to incorporate some vegetables. In the beginning, I did cut out carbs, but eventually I reintroduced things like sweet potatoes and a little bit of brown rice and even white rice afterwards. And I realized afterwards that carbs really weren't the problem. It was really just my portion sizes and the amount of food that I was eating. And we'll get into that toward the end of the video. Let's go into fitness now. So what was I doing before that got me up to 300 pounds? Well, I'll tell you what, most of it was the diet, because the fitness, I really wasn't doing much. I wasn't doing a ton of exercise. I was trying to walk a little bit here and there, but the problem is I wasn't consistent with it. I was never consistent with my exercise. Unless I was in high school where I played football 1 year, other than that, I just wasn't consistent with exercise. I would do it for a little bit. I wanted to get quick results. I didn't get quick results, obviously. So then I would stop. I would get sore. If I went strength training, I would get sore. It was uncomfortable. And then I didn't feel like I was making any progress. I thought maybe I was going to get bigger by building muscle. And so I didn't want to get bigger. I wanted to get smaller. And so I didn't want to do strength training because I wanted to get smaller. And the people that did strength training would get bigger. At least that's what I thought back then. It just goes to show how powerful the mind is and how powerful the information that we expose ourselves to is. Because back then I was being kind of guided by everything that I was learning. And a lot of what I was learning was if you're strength training, you're going to get big and bulky. Yeah, you're going to get strong, but you're going to get big and bulky. If you want to lose weight, the way to lose weight is to do cardio, to hop on a treadmill for an hour every day. And so going into fitness, the way that I lost the weight was really that. I started walking because I couldn't run in the beginning. I was too big. I was almost 300 pounds. I was about, I think, 297 or 298 at my heaviest. And so I couldn't run. I literally physically could not run. Started walking, eventually started maybe jogging a little bit and then walking. So like that run walking combo. I went to this park where it had basically kind of like a big square and 2 laps was 1 mile. And so I eventually went one day, the first day that I went, March 1st, and I think it was 1 or 2 laps, and I was gassed, I was tired, and it was all just walking at a slow pace. And so then I started to go every day, and then eventually I started to walk more, and then eventually I picked up my pace, and then eventually I was doing 5 laps, and then I was doing 10 laps, so that was 5 miles. And then eventually I started doing 5 miles in the day, so 10 laps in the morning, for example. And then I would go back at night and I would do another 10 laps. So all of a sudden I was doing 5 miles in the morning and 5 miles at night, 10 miles a day, which is crazy and unsustainable. But when you're that heavy, you will do anything to lose the weight. I'm talking about I was so heavy that I would bend over to tie my shoe and I had to hold my breath. Like that's the uncomfortable feeling that I had. I know what that feels like. And so when you're in that position and you're as determined as I was 19 at the time, I was incredibly determined to just kind of get past this part of my life. And I knew that I was going to do it. It was just a matter of time. Then you will do anything possible. And so even if it means doing the things that maybe aren't sustainable, but you'll figure it out afterwards, right? It's not sustainable. Okay, well, I'll figure it out when I lose the weight, right? And now I would do things differently, but I also understand what it's like to be very overweight and to say, you know what, that's great. You're telling me it's not sustainable, but I just want to get to my goal weight and then I want to lose all this weight. And then after that, then I'll worry about how I sustain it. That's the thinking that most people have. And so we'll talk about how I would shift that thinking from the beginning. But with that said, I'm going to tell you how it went in this video. And this is just me talking to you about my experience about losing 125 pounds. I lost it fast, 6 months. So what that takes is a level of discipline and a level of really obsession. I tell people I was obsessed with losing the weight that I needed to lose. And that meant doing everything possible, which meant going and, walking 5 miles in the morning and then 5 miles at night. And then eventually I would shift that into running. So then I was running 5 miles during the day and then 5 miles, in the evenings. And so 10 miles a day was a lot to sustain. Now, I didn't start strength training until about 40 to 50 pounds of weight loss. So after I lost about 40 or 50 pounds, that's when I started to actually think about strength training. And then we'll talk about how I would do that differently as well. But I didn't know any better. Again, I didn't want to get big, so I didn't want to do any strength training. I said, I want to get smaller. I want to lose the weight first before I go and get bigger and get muscles. So eventually, September of that year, just 6 months into it, I was down to about 170 pounds. So it was really, the biggest shift was in nutrition, but then it was also walking and then running a lot, and then eventually doing some strength training. And so what can I say about the entire process? My honest opinion is, I wish I had someone who would have guided me through that process so that I would have been more efficient and I would have done things in a more healthy way. But when you don't have that, you just go at it and you just learn and you try to be resourceful and you try to get information from wherever it is that you can get information, and you just go through the process. And every day you get up and you say, you know what, today I'm going to be a little better than yesterday. And that's exactly how I continued to progress. Is I told myself, I know that I'm not going to see a huge difference tomorrow, but I know that I'll see a big difference in a month, and I know I'll see a big difference in 2 and 3 and 4 and 5 months. And then next thing you know, all of those little differences compound on each other. And 6 months later, I was down 125, 130 pounds. That's really how change happens. It's these small, subtle shifts that you do every day. For me, it was really a mindset thing. I told myself, I am not going to be the person that's overweight and 300 pounds anymore. I'm going to be the healthy person. And this healthy person does healthy things, which means they eat healthy. They make smarter decisions around food. They educate themselves around what they should and shouldn't eat. They take care of their body. They love their body, right? Those are all things that I didn't have in the beginning when I first started that journey. And so nutrition and fitness aside, I focused on my mindset, and I understood that in order for me to put myself in a position where I was going to be healthy for the long term, I needed to get my mind right. And I needed to understand and believe that I can take myself to that point. And so what that meant was I had to do the activities every single day to prove it to myself. Confidence comes from doing something over and over again and proving to yourself that you can do it. That's how you get confidence in something. And so I got really confident in knowing that what I was doing was working because I did it every day. If I didn't do it, then I wouldn't know if it worked or not, and I would never be confident. So sometimes people want to say, you have to be confident to do this, you have to be confident to do that. I disagree. I think it's backward. I think you need to do something and prove to yourself that you can do it so that then you can become confident in doing that. And then you can repeat that action over and over and over again until you get to your goal. So that's a lot of information about nutrition and fitness and mindset and everything that I went through to lose, over 125 pounds in 6 months. Let's talk about what I would do differently. So a couple of things that I would do differently. I know now that unless you're a type 2 diabetic, I was not, I don't think I was. I never went to the doctor to get tested, but I don't think I was in a type 2 diabetic situation when I was at my heaviest. But if you're a type 2 diabetic, then that's a different reason, and maybe you want to cut out some sugars and some carbs and so forth. However, I don't think that there's a reason to cut out any specific foods. And if I had someone that told me, Eddie, I want to lose 125, 130, 150 pounds, whatever, I would say, okay, let's put a plan in place. Let's look at the foods that you do and don't enjoy, and let's work around that, because that's what's going to be sustainable for the long term. And I would focus on it from a nutrition perspective. So I think one thing to note is that, yeah, I focused on protein from the nutrition perspective, and I focused on foods and making sure that I was eating whole foods. But really what I was doing was I was walking and running a shit ton. Like I was doing a lot of exercise. Something that's not sustainable for the long term, because I don't even do that much exercise now. I don't walk 10 miles every day. And so that's just not sustainable. And what I would do differently with someone today is I would say, we're not going to do so much exercise that you're going to feel like you're killing yourself to keep this weight off. What we're going to do instead is we're going to make sure that we hone in on the diet. And by doing that, we're going to be able to lose fat, and then you're going to be able to enjoy your exercise, and you're not going to think of exercise as a punishment. You're going to enjoy the workouts that you like. You're going to do a lot of different types of workouts that you're going to enjoy, and you're going to be able to stick to that over the long run because you're doing things that you enjoy, whether it's biking, whether it's walking, whether it's strength training. The other thing that I would change is I would start strength training from the beginning. So I would tell you, start strength training as soon as you start your weight loss goal and as soon as you start your journey. You're not going to get bigger and bulky by lifting weights. If anything, strength training should be something that you do even before you do cardio. And so I like to split up nutrition and fitness into two separate things. And when you think about fat loss and weight loss, you want to do it from the nutrition side. You want to make sure that you know how much you're eating and the foods that you're eating, and that you're incorporating foods that are going to keep you full so that you're not hungry all the time like I was. So that's number one. Number two, an easy way to do that is to incorporate some kind of way to track your food and have awareness around how much you're eating. This is something that I didn't do. I never learned how to track food until maybe 3 or 4 years ago. And I've kept my weight off for over 20 years, but I never really tracked food until 3 or 4 years ago. And what I learned is that gave me the freedom to decide what I wanted to eat and what I maybe thought wasn't worth it. So now tracking has given me this freedom where if I want to have some dessert or I want to have a sweet treat, whatever it is that I want to have, I'm tracking all of my food throughout the day so I understand what I can and cannot have. And if I know I'm going to have a big dinner, I'm going to make sure that I plan for that by having a lighter lunch or a lighter breakfast. Before, I wasn't doing any of those things. And so I think there's so much planning that you can do to set yourself up for success Whereas back then I was just kind of going through it and rolling with the punches and just figuring it out as I went along. You can't blame me because I didn't know any better, but that's just how I knew how to do it back then. Now I would track food so that I had a lot more control, and I would think about how much protein am I having? How many carbs am I having? How many fats am I having? And I would realize that no food is good or bad. It's just the situation that you're in and how much you're having of it. The other thing I would say is, and this sounds incredibly stupid, but I used to worry about how much water I would drink. And sometimes I wouldn't want to drink a lot of water because I didn't want it to affect my scale weight. There's times, and I know that I'm not the only person that went to Walgreens or CVS and bought diuretic pills and took these pills because I wanted to see the scale weight go down. And literally what that's doing is just taking water out of my body and making me unhealthy. And so it's incredibly embarrassing and shameful to say that, but I've been there. I've been the person that goes and buys these diuretic water weight loss pills and takes those. And so what I would do differently is I would understand now, and I would tell the person, look, your weight's going to fluctuate every single day. It's okay. It's normal. You have to stay hydrated. You have to drink enough water because that's what's going to keep your body healthy. And by the way, water is going to help you stay full most of the time. So that's just kind of a natural, nice kind of perk of drinking enough water every day, is that you're staying full. You'll make better decisions around the foods that you do eat. And so I can't believe that I'm saying this, but I used to be the person that thought, I don't want the water to affect my scale weight, so I'm not going to drink that much water. And that's just crazy. It's so unhealthy. It's so contrary to what I would tell anyone to do today. The other thing I would do, and this is something that I actually did do myself, but I would just focus on mindset first. And I would tell myself, if I'm going to be someone that weighs a certain amount and is healthy and fit, then I need to put myself in that right mindset. And so not necessarily something that I would do differently, because somehow, some way I knew that I needed to do that back then. I don't know how I knew that. I didn't read it in a book, but I knew that I had to shift my identity. And so that's what I would tell someone today, is you have to start with shifting your identity and becoming a healthy person in your mind and believing that you can be a healthy person before you go and tackle the logistics of it and do all of the tactical work of what foods am I going to eat and how much am I going to work out and what type of workouts am I going to do. First, just shift your mindset. Make sure that you truly believe that you can be healthy and lose weight, because anyone can. There are people who have lost even more weight than I have, who have lost 200, 300, 400 pounds. It's possible. You just have to put yourself in the right mindset. The minute you start to believe it is the minute that you'll start to be making progress. If you like this video, please make sure that you like it. It helps other people find this content. Make sure that you subscribe to the channel. I'm going to be doing about one of these every week. So I'm going to talk about a host of different topics, anything around mindset, health, weight loss, muscle building, and then just lifestyle in general. So whatever it is that I feel like sharing with you guys in terms of how my entire journey has impacted the way that I look at life and how it's impacted my life in a positive way. If you want to know about when I release new videos, then make sure that you hit the notifications button so that we can notify you every time that I release a new video. I also have a free weekly newsletter that you can sign up for. And just as a thank you for signing up for that, I'll actually send you a copy of my free nutrition cheat sheet ebook. So the link is in the description for that. And then one last thing, I also have a private Facebook group where I try to do monthly Zoom calls with the people only in that group. And it's an opportunity for me to kind of share more content, share more information, and then do a Q&A session at the very end of that. So if you want to interact with me in a group setting and you want to continue to get free information, then make sure that you click to join into that private Facebook group where I'm going to be doing, again, monthly Zoom calls with a lot of really good information for you guys. Again, all the links are in the description below. So make sure that you click, make sure that you take a look. You can follow me on any other social media platforms that are down there as well. All the links are in the description. I'll see you soon.